welcome to episode 7 of Defense Against the Dark Arts. I'm Paul Miil. And today we're going to be talking about... the fuck are we talking about? Had some notes. Framing. We're going to talk about framing. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about framing. This is the purpose of all these videos is to help people with critical thinking. Now, we all can think better than we do now. Let me have a definition of critical thinking. It's the unbiased analysis of facts to form a judgment. It is self-directed, self-disciplined, self-motivated, and self-corrective thinking. And that sounds pretty good. I typed before about, I mentioned appeal to intellect. This is sort of an aside. Appeal to intellect isn't really a logical fallacy in itself. It's a technique that people use when they appeal to your intellect. It's an appeal to flattery. Oh, well, if you're enlightened, if you're among us, if you're smart enough, then you should know this, right? If you don't know this, then you're not smart enough, then you're not, right? So that's, they're appealing to your well, whatever, maybe I'll cut that part out. Okay, yeah, so critical thinking is critical. And, so this whole series is about, manipulation and propaganda, public relations. Well, not really public relations, but public relations, I guess, is a modern take on propaganda, even though propaganda is, the propagation of information. And the thing is that it's public relations and propaganda. I know people will argue about the definitions, and that's part of the problem. But it's about changing attitudes. It's not about informing you. It's about changing how you think about something, and that's could be a positive thing or it could be a negative thing. If you're have wrong think, right? If you're doing something that's wrong, it's not now what's right or what's wrong. Well, beneficial. Is it beneficial to you? Maybe you're doing something that's detrimental. Maybe someone's trying to help you, right? So they might be using, manipulation to try to help you see, what you're doing wrong, the error of your ways. But then that also could just be because they don't like what you're doing and they don't want you to do that. So they're going to try to, maybe it's beneficial for them to stop you from doing that, right? I don't know. Could be anything. But manipulation is not enlightenment, right? Manipulation generally is not for your benefit. It's generally not, for your benefit. It's not to be enlightened. It's to be persuaded and to have your attitude changed on something, your beliefs, depending on the degree. So we can't rely on any type of public relations society of America, if there is one, or the government, like to help us address or protect us from manipulative scum. Right, that's like getting the pedophiles to watch The Orphanage, right? The government trying to protect you from manipulation, right? These guys are the worst. Anyway, so it's incumbent upon us to try to better ourselves, to think critically, to try to find the tactics and the techniques that these people use against us and watch out for them. These are things that we also use against ourselves. A lot of this is instinctive and we stumble across some of these things on our own without really thinking about it. We just, start, you watch two kids that try to manipulate each other, right? So anyway, so this brings us to the topic of the day, which is framing. Now, framing, you think, is framing good or bad? Like you always hear people talking about framing in the news, and framing is as implied as being evil. Well, framing is not evil. None of us are omniscient. We don't know everything. Nobody out there knows everything. There's too much information to know. Look about this pen, who knows all about this pen? There might be somebody who knows about the pen. But generally speaking, the whole story of, I don't know, I forget about that. But we're not omniscient. We don't know everything. Every story, or even everything you know about things, is generally it's an executive summary. It's it's put in a small context. It's framed. It's in a little frame, right? So you get a little picture frame of a bit of information, right? Because we can't know everything, so we have to know little chunks. So you have to frame a story or frame something in a little frame of context for us to understand it, right? Or to be able to transmit that information, to convey it, I guess. So let's start with examples. I stole an article here. Well, I didn't steal the article. I read an article, but it has some information. So the general idea of this guy's article, I think it was a guy who wrote it. Could be a woman. I think it was a guy. Is that energy has plateaued and it's not increased for a certain period. Yet more electronic gadgets have been sold now more than ever. Okay, so there's a bit of news. There's a bit of fact. Now, enter the framing of the narrative, right? So the story is electricity usage hasn't gone up. It's sort of flat, even though we're selling more electronic stuff. So there's a fact. Now, how do they frame the story? Well, there's different ways they could frame the story. One way this story could be framed is that it's a problem for the nation's utilities because they make money based on usage. Wow, look at this problem we have. We're selling all kinds of more junk, but the energy usage isn't going up. So now how are the hydro companies going to make more money, right? That could be framed that way. It could be framed as how energy efficient our engineers are today. Our engineers are engineering devices to be very energy efficient, which is, generally a good thing, right? You don't have to, your battery life lasts longer. You don't have to recharge it as much. It doesn't consume as much. It doesn't get as hot. It doesn't waste energy. The energy that it's using is useful. So you're not paying for energy that's just being used to heat up something, right? Unnecessarily, right? Radiates more light than heat, right? So, an inefficient thing irradiates more heat than light, unless you want heat out of it, like a heater, electric heater. Well, then you want it to radiate heat. You don't care about, actually, you don't want it to radiate light because that's a waste of energy. You want all the energy to be down in the infrared. Okay, it could also be framed as hope for reduced greenhouse gas emissions in the future. Things are becoming more efficient and less energy use. It could also be framed as hope for energy independence from foreign oil supplies. So it could be that same bit of story, and we see this all the time. We see it all the time when the news, or what used to be the news, reframes stories. So they have a story. Now, of course, all stories have to be framed in a context. But what they do, it's called spin. Now, there's a difference between spin and framing. Spin is, all stories are framed. They have to be. All documentaries, everything has to be framed, reduced to a bite-sized chunk that you can communicate with somebody else. But spin is, what's the difference with spin? Spin is the intentional misdirection, the amplification of things that are beneficial, favorable to their campaign or the goal of the person giving you the information, right? That's amplified. It's a positive amplification. Now you think of amplification, it could be attenuated or amplified negatively. Anyways, so the unfavorable facts are amplified negatively or attenuated, right? So, or typically they're ignored, right? They don't talk about them at all, right? A good study, if you want to see somebody doing this with a masterful skill, is to watch Prime Minister Justin Trudeau when he's asked any question that doesn't come from his lapdog subservient PR media hounds. If it comes from opposition or anybody like that, he will amplify a positive generality that has nothing to do with the question, and then he will not answer the question even if the question is a direct yes or no. So it's like, did you grab that reporter's butt? we have been doing everything to help Canadians, blah, 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 blah. And then actually when he got pinned down, his answer was, people experience things differently. Now, this is Rich from the guy who, is the feminist twat. What a dick. Anyway, so, he can grope reporters' asses, and they experience it differently. Anyways, but he's the master of not answering a question. He's the answer of spin. And, spin can actually be trained. It's a bit of framing to spin it to something positive. So what he does is more of a non-answer than spin, but that's generally what spin does. Spin is amplifying the positive, traits to your story, to their goal, and ignoring the negative facts that are detrimental to their story. So this video is about framing, and which is using information, not avoiding it, not non-answering. So so framing can imply a story within a story. It can imply another story in a target's mind, which may not be true. So they give you here's a fact, here's a little bit, but they'll amplify or exaggerate certain words or say things over and over and over again to make you imply, or they'll imply certain things, and then you'll use the causation correlation fallacy and jump to a conclusion or an assumption that is wrong. You'll assume that the A caused B. A good example is that the famous one of the ice cream sales go up and kid drownings go up. Well, they both go up because summertime, right? Ice cream sales go up and more kids swim. But the news will report, ice cream sales went up and more children drowned. Well, yeah, that's a fact. Ice cream sales did go up and more kids drowned, but one did not cause the other thing, right? But they'll do that, in so many different things. And people, especially if it's emotional, they'll try to bring up emotions and try to cloud your judgment so you don't think about it, being a fallacy, a causation correlation fallacy. But framing is huge, right? It's a very powerful tool. These techniques can be used for, good and evil. Like I've made a couple documentaries, and, I had to cut out information because I had to frame it to fit, an hour and a half or whatever it was, an hour and a half. So a lot of really interesting stories that I couldn't include, which would have gave more context. But I mean, there's a limit to how much you can put in. You can't, especially if it's over a time period, when you do something on a band, for example, you can't give everything that happened to them. You can't give the full context. You can give sort of a rough idea. You can frame it, and you can sort of give, but it will not be, oh, that's not exactly how it happened. Well, of course it's not exactly how it happened. In order for it to know exactly how it happened, you'd had to have been there. And even then, your perspective experience is different than the person who's standing next to you, depending on your frame of mind, right? So everything is framed. Everything, even, but it's easy for a manipulator to reframe a true story to a message that is bogus or the opposite of what actually happened. So, but not all framing is negative, In fact, looking through, different perspectives at the same story is critical to, a greater understanding of it. But, we're talking about brainwashing, and we're not talking about, that's actually, maybe we should talk about that too. It's beneficial for us to try to see stories from different perspectives, but we're going to try to focus more on the manipulation side of things and how these tools are used to, manipulate us. Changing your attitude can drastically change how you perceive, a story, right? Especially if it's an emotional, right? So changing attributes of a story, of a frame, can actually reverse the meaning of it, right? You think, well, how can you reverse the meaning? How could you frame something the opposite? Well, you could try to reframe a problem, the famous, was it Chinese, the symbol? It's for problem is the same as opportunity or something like that. That's used in, cliche, the office type, stuff all the time. A problem is an opportunity, right? So that's reframing, right? It could be a weakness as a strength, or a strength as a weakness, an impossibility as an impending event, oppression as safety, hate as justice. Your frame can be radically changed by your emotion, like hate, right? Or happy, optimistic, right? Fear, aggression. These are emotion is used to frame stories all the time, and that's the key tool for a manipulator is emotion. Like you think about how, say, if somebody wants to bring about change, they could frame it. You say, "Well, I don't want to change," whatever. They could say, "Well, let's look at it another way." Right? It's not so much about doing away with the old ways as, building a new exciting future, right? So that's reframing change as, not doing away with the old, right? We're bringing in a new exciting future, right? So they're framing, but who knows what that could be, right? It could be, it's a new exciting, we're not firing you. Don't think of us as firing you. We're enabling you to embrace a new exciting future, right? Well, who knows? It could be tied, many different ways. Or a raise can be reframed as a way to keep talented people. Maybe a secretary will try to tell her boss to give everybody a raise. Because if they want to keep the talented people, whatever. Reframing could also be a symbolic gesture, like a popular kid at a lunch table in a cafeteria could sit with a loser, and that would reframe the loser as not being as much of a loser. Or it might reframe the cool kid as being a loser. It depends on how much of a loser that kid really is. Yeah. So, but that's, gestures could be used as reframing. Manipulators would do this in a way to confuse the truth in order to push a false narrative, while not causing dissonance in your mind, right? But they'll distort your reality, right? If they cause dissonance, if, the two different things, then you're going to notice, and you're going to be like, whoa, what's up here? Something's wrong. But if they're saying what you want to hear, then you might ignore facts and evidence contrary to what you want to believe, right? So there's no dissonance in your mind. So they're going to push this false narrative, and you're going to want to believe that false narrative because you're an idiot, right? So like a salesman might turn your objection buying, like, I can't afford it. They might spin that to, you can't afford not to buy it. All that scammy business crap, right? Salesman shit, right? Leaders might try to take a scary moment and turn it into an exciting moment, right? We're at a threshold moment, where we have the courage to step through. You listen to all the thing is, the more these guys try to talk like that, the less believable it is, right? Some, may reframe your words, face to face. They'll respond to the emotion of what you're saying or how you're saying it, not actually the words. It's tricky, but it's a powerful tool. If they connect with you at an emotional level, they don't even know, obviously they're not going to agree with what you're saying. They don't care, right? They're just trying to connect at that same emotion that what you're saying to try to, make you believe that you share values, blah, 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 right? So, yeah, so somebody might try to reframe what you say, your words, face to face, and, to try to reformulate what you said to be closer to what they want you to have said. And, common expression you hear when they're doing this is, so what you're saying is, right? So they're reframing what you're saying to their framing, right? They could spin what you're saying to something that's negative. That's a common one. There was a study in 2005 by Bizer and Petty, and they found that people who framed their political view in positive support of a candidate were more persuasive than those who viewed their position in opposition of the candidate. So the idea was that positive campaigns are more persuasive than smear campaigns, But you wouldn't know that seeing what's going on, whenever there's an election. It's the smear campaigns are flying like crazy. And you always hear these people say, well, smear campaigns are effective. They're more, well, not according to that study. 2005 Bizer, B-I-Z-E-R, and Petty. Maybe they're losers. I don't know. So, manipulation, getting back to emotion, manipulation is heavily connected with emotion. Changing your emotion will change your frame of mind. And frame of mind is critical for us to, catch the meaning of certain things. If you're in the wrong frame of mind, you could easily miss important details, or you might create different meanings from a situation. You might, like if one player on a team, does something dirty, right? Another player who didn't do anything dirty, and that team walks up to you, is like, he was about to say, like, good game or whatever. You might be all like ready to punch the guy in the face because he's on that team. And you're just assuming that guy, because your emotional state, your frame of mind is that they're the enemy, right? Because that guy, one guy did something dirty. So now the other guy on the other team's coming over, he didn't even know the other guy did something dirty, right? So you might misread the situation, right? Yeah, so you can get different meanings from different situations. Like it reminds me of after my dad died, my mom went on a Hawaiian cruise, and so I asked her how it went, right? And she didn't like it. She said it was just a bunch of old coots and tourist traps, right? And so in a different mind, she could have had a very enjoyable trip, right? Reading a book on a lounger, watching the sunrise and the sunsets, drinking her, drinks and stuff. But her frame of mind wasn't in the right place for that to happen. Yeah. So beyond personal frames, there's ideologies, which is like a group frame, right? Political and academic. They're frames for created meaning. They're larger frames, larger context, like for created meaning. Even in the hard sciences, they use models, as frames for understanding, and those guys are supposed to know that those are just frames. They're tentative models, and they're subject to change. That's the whole point of science. It's not supposed to be dogma. It's supposed to be as we believe up to this point, which is always open to change, which is always, there's no invariants or absolutes. We can change it. Everything's changeable in science, right? If there's evidence to prove something wrong, even though up to this point everything seemed to prove it right, we're willing to change, right? But there's tenured douchebags, that lose track of that and seem to focus on, meaningless awards for their pathetic egos instead of, real science. And these scumbags should be, canned, right? But they're tenured, so they're not going to be fired, and they're going to continue being douchebags and, pushing dogma and not really, arguing or actually arguing against, new insight, new information. They want to keep everything the same, right? Because they don't have to change or challenge or do anything, which is the whole point of being tenured. You're supposed to be able to, you're tenured so you can explore and do crazy things and try to come up with new science. But the opposite seems to be happening with these idiots. But you take, for example, gravity. I've talked about this before, but we've known that gravity is not a force. There's no force of gravity. We've known this for over 100 years with Einstein. But it's a warping of space-time. But it's still framed as a force, in school. Why? Well, because they assume that, most people don't need to know or don't care that it's not a force. It's just good enough. Tell them it's a force. Don't explain, warp space-time, even though we've known it's warp space-time for over 100 years, right? So, so it's a model. It's a theory. It's not a theory. It's a model. It's a frame for understanding. And it's not accurate, but it's good enough, to push the kids through. So cultures share frames to interpret the world. One may not be more accurate than the other. It's just like the Hawaiian cruise, with my mom. She was accurate about the old coots, right? And the tourist traps. But, she could have framed it that it was, fresh air, margaritas, on the deck of the boat, she would have had an enjoyable time if she would have framed it that way, but she didn't. So, one's not right, one's not wrong. She wasn't wrong to frame it that way, but what was more beneficial to her, right? To interpret it positive or interpret it negative, right? So some interpretations are wrong, though, but just because it's a culture, religion, or postmodern ideology doesn't mean that we should pretend that it's right. And this is what's going on today as well. We have to pretend that these frames are just as valid. And that goes to conflict resolution. Manipulators will also do this, but the thing about conflict resolution, they use the techniques. First you got to get both parties to understand that their frame of reference is just a frame. You get both people to agree that there are different frames, which may be valid, and convince them that no person has the right frame, which is not true. And so they'll get you to accept that the other person's frame is valid, and then explore similarities and differences and try to find a compromise, which reminds me of a joke, a conflict resolution joke. There's the Palestinians who want all Jews dead, and then there's the Jews who don't want to die, and then the U.S. Conflict resolution team meets with them and says, "Okay," to the Jews, "why don't you meet the Palestinians halfway?" Badumts. So, yeah, on that note, I think we're done. We're done for today. So this is that was episode 7. We're going to be doing episode 8 coming soon.